One. Welcome back to HoopsHD, everybody, assuming that we are recording. I think we are. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood.
What's the point?
This is our October podcast.
Why? Why are we here? There's no border war. It was canceled. Why? What the?
I'm your host, Chad Sherwood, joined by Rocco Miller and Joby Forts up here in the top row. We got John Teitel on one side of the bottom row. The other side, technically, I guess, on the bottom row, no video for him, just a picture of the Big East. We have Zach back with us. And David, I am not Jeffrey Dubin. Griggs down there in this right below me.
I am not. Well, why would I be? What's there to be excited about? There's no border war. It's canceled.
Okay. We are not talking about board war. This is our October podcast. Normally, we don't do one of these. Normally, around this time of year, we are getting ready for our first of our conference preview podcasts. Obviously, the start of the
We
season
should be getting ready for the border
November.
war, but it was canceled.
Are you done?
No, I think so.
Okay. We normally would be getting ready for our preseason podcast. We're going to do one more podcast here with the full panel here and just kind of going over a lot of the news and notes that have been going on, kind of taking a look at what we think this season might look like. It's anything like what college football has been like so far. It's going to be, half the schedule getting canceled before each week. But before we get to any of that, I wanted to start with head coach that's been in the news recently. And Rocco, let me start with you here. Greg Marshall making a few headlines recently and not in the good way at all.
Yeah, I think Jeff Goodman was the first to break the story. It's been a months-long investigation. I think going back to right towards the end of the season, I think probably one of the things that set off fire alarms is that they had, 7 or 8 guys leave the program at the end of last season. And then
It was 7, yeah.
It was 7, yeah. So he broke his story. The Athletic's been on top of it. Most of the major outlets have been on top of it. And now I think today a story out of Winthrop from his time there came out where similar behavior of him, either using just unbelievable language with players or being even physically abusive has come out. So I think the main story that started it all was with Shaquille Morris back in 2016. There was I don't know, Chad, you might know better than me, somewhat of a choking incident. But the bottom line is I think the real story is Wichita State's failure to really address anything. They have not suspended him. They have not really done much as far as how they're going to handle the situation. And everybody's kind of continuing in limbo. And meanwhile, stories continue to come out about former players. And, it's got to be a hard thing on the program as they start practices, as they start building their schedule, et cetera, on what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
Exactly. And with this all out there, Teitel, let me ask you, with all this out there, teams are already starting to practice. If you're going to make a move, shouldn't you do it immediately?
Yes. I mean, I hear Texas State still has a vacancy as long as we're talking about coaches behaving badly.
At least they fired
right
him.
On the cusp. Yeah, but there's an opening. No, I mean, we are finally, hopefully, prayingly on the cusp of the college basketball season tipping off next month. And this is the last thing, obviously, that any team wants, much less Wichita State, like a perennial contender for the NCAA tournament. Very disturbed by the fact that it's bad enough if anything happened at Wichita State, obviously, be it verbal or physical. But as Rocco said, to have it starting back at Winthrop like a decade plus ago, almost inexcusable. I assume it'll cost him his job, but talk to me next month or maybe tomorrow. We'll see.
Well, it hasn't yet, and you say it's inexcusable, Teitel, and it is, but it's also rather rampant. I mean, granted, this has been going on since Winthrop, and it's probably far more common in college sports in general, but especially college basketball, and you sort of wonder why this is happening. I realize that that's kind of a multi-layered question, but what is it that makes coaches think that this is what they're supposed to be doing or what they should be doing, or at the very least, and I think it's even more than this, they obviously think it's okay, but I think some of them think it's more than okay. It's what they just think that that's what they're supposed to be doing, and you almost wonder where in the culture that comes from. It wasn't an incident. It was an example of what has been happening for really 15 years with this guy. And we're beating up on him, but he's not the only one. And you almost wonder, what is it? Is it because Bobby Knight appeared that way, Vince Lombardi? What is it about college coaches in general in all sports that makes them think that this is the way you're supposed to act and the way you're supposed to treat people? Who didn't do this? John Wooden. Maybe that was too long ago. Maybe you haven't heard of him, but Brad Stevens didn't either. A lot of people that have had success without doing that. So why do so many coaches think that this is how they're supposed to behave?
Well, maybe.
Sorry.
Maybe also this is, Greg Marshall is constantly referred to for bigger jobs, quote unquote, from Wichita State. And it seemed like nothing ever happened. It was like, oh, you're a favorite for X job or Y job. Yeah, Greg Marshall. Let's put him up. Look what he's done at Wichita State. And it never happened. Maybe some stuff came up in the background, and who knows? That dug it up, and they said, there's a lot of good candidates. We're not going to go with the risk here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I got to say, David, you mentioned Bobby Knight. One of the things that when complaints were made about a guy like Bobby Knight, there was always seemed to be a bunch of former players that all came out and said what a great guy he was. And it's really been – I'm not going to accuse, innocent before till proven guilty at all with Greg Marshall, but I haven't seen very many players at all that used to play for him coming out and saying, oh, no, he didn't do this type of stuff. He's a great guy. And some of it, but not nearly as much as you think there would have been. And that's very disturbing, I think, to me in terms of, the truth of this.
Well, there's the famous quote from, I think, Herb Adderley on Lombardi. You mentioned Lombardi. Yeah. And, the black players defend him because, he treated us all the same, like dogs.
Yeah. Well, another guy that I didn't mention,
Perfect.
Joby, is your guy. Like, God, I'm blanking. Oh my God, Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett.
Certainly not
Okay.
that of that behavior, but again, so. One of the things when it's pointed out when people complain, and again, I'm not just talking about Greg Marshall, but in general, when it's a college coach, especially if it's a coach of a revenue sport that's having success, they're like, well, yeah, but look, he's winning. It really is a method to the madness. No, there isn't. Like, you don't have to do that. I don't think Greg Marshall would have been any less successful had he not been as big of an asshole. And I think that's true for so many coaches out there that do this regularly. Maybe not to this extreme, but just in general. The idea that you have to be a dick in order to win. You don't. My opinion.
I just want
I'll tell you what. I think on that note, I wanted to talk about the other big news.
Let's Zach talk. Real quick. What were you going to say?
I was going to ask Zach the very next question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you got to comment on Greg first.
I've been offended by Tony Bennett for years, but it has nothing to do with how he treats people. It's just watching a team play basketball. But just real quick, it's amazing to me how long this supposedly has gone on. But at the same time, it's a reminder of how things work in that it's conduct and practice. And it's just the players really there and the coaches who see it. And outside of that, look, I love the University of Hartford basketball, but it's not exactly getting the same attention on it as even Southern Miss football. So it's just the microscope is so small sometimes that even the things that should jump out somehow happen. And it's really scary. And close to us, we've got a kid who transferred in there. There were 7 transfers out in the spring. Usually not a good sign. But I also wonder now if this is kind of the reason he's part of why he's been there so long. Is the money behind that program from the coach is enough to keep him there. I think that's part of why I think if it's true, obviously he shouldn't be allowed to coach anywhere in this sport, period, and needs to get help. But I also think there will be a real defiance, unfortunately, forthcoming from Wichita because, the minute he's gone at Wichita State, this isn't a Gonzaga situation. He is it. So I may cling on to the life raft even as it's going under, unfortunately. And I really worry for the kids who are there, who are stuck in that awful situation.
especially the ex-UConn transfers from this year. But let's
Yeah.
well, let's not talk about Tariq Gilbert. We'll talk about that, all that when we get to our conference previews. But let's instead turn to the other issue, though, which is maybe it does have to tie this a little bit because all the kids that are there this year are actually going to could technically get 2 years there at Wichita State as well as everywhere else. David, let me start with you. The NCAA came out with the announcement that everybody that plays winter sports or basketball this year will get an extra year of eligibility. That means that they will actually get to, if you're a senior, you're a senior 1, and next year you'll get to come back and be a senior 2, I guess, or the like. If you're
Correct.
even if you're on a red shirting this year, you could still get an extra year of eligibility. If you're on the team this year, you're going to get 6 years to complete 5 years worth of basketball. Basically.
Probably. What they have the standard rule is that you have 5 years to play 4 seasons in a sport. From the time you start as a full-time student, from that moment on, you have 5 years to play 4 seasons. What they have done is said this year, regardless of how much you play, how little you play, it will not count as one of the 4 seasons that you're allowed to play. So in essence, you now have 5 years to play 5 seasons. If you are a senior, like it is your 4th year of college or your 5th year of college, you have only played 3 seasons and you want to play this year, you can come back next year, even if it is beyond your 5 years. Did that make sense? It made sense in my head, but my head is a messed up place.
Right. But it's basically you now have 6 years to play 5 seasons for the players that are around. And
probably
this is going to be something that's not like this year. It's going to move ahead the next 3-4 years.
Yes.
The guys that are freshmen this year are going to be able to play 4 more seasons beyond this year, even. So
right.
There's going to be
now there are some unforeseen
effects
here, or maybe more foreseen. There have been discussions but no answers, or if there's clarity, I'm not clear on it, on how they're going to manage roster sizes. Right now you're still only allowed 13 scholarships. If you're recruiting players that you're expecting to come in next year and your seniors want to come back, how do you make room for them? I don't think they're going to go beyond the 13 limit. I just don't think they're going to do that. I kind of wish they would, maybe just for 1 year. But it might actually sort of create some strife some places over availability to athletic aid or scholarships or spots on the roster in general. But if you ask me, do I like this or not, I do. I think overall it's going to help more people than it's going to hurt.
And Tytel, let me ask you this, though. I think that this may actually tie in with the fact that I think we are pretty much going to be seeing the requirement of having to sit out a year when you transfer, at least for one transfer, gone, and that everybody, whether you're a graduate student or not, is going to be able to transfer once without sitting out. This might all tie into it because you may see a lot of these seniors just transfer and find a team that does have a spot, and as opposed to, what David said, that we're going to have the strife there.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it will be somewhat chaotic, to say the least, with people going everywhere because they want to. But the thing, there's so many different factors. Do they want to go to a warm weather place after playing in a cold weather place? Do they want to go from a small school to a high major?
Oh, they play basketball indoors. The temperature's pretty standard.
Obviously, have not spent a lot of winters in Boston, I see.
Yeah.
That's the Harvard kids. I mean, I think that a lot of people will be switching it up, and some will chase a ring, which I don't know that I wouldn't if I were in their shoes. But, yeah, it could be pretty crazy. I hope that they realize that if there's 5 other guys transferring, they might not start for the team they transferred to.
Right. Chad, you brought up a real good point, as did Tytel. I think had it not been for COVID, had we had the meetings had the NCAA had the meetings this summer, that would have passed already. I think the year in residency rule is 1 year away from being gone, and it needs to go.
Well, and Rocco, I think we're already almost seeing it this year too. I've been looking at the transfer waiver lists, and I think there's about 5 waivers in the entire country that were not approved heading into next season. Pretty much everyone's getting a waiver to transfer without having to sit out a year if they apply for one. But Rocco, what do you think about the extra year of eligibility rule and how it's going to affect, just not only this year but going forward?
Yeah, I think what David's saying, I'm on the same page with. I think what you'll see is, I think the major variable is what we've noticed over the last few years is even your, Mountain West role-playing seniors can still get overseas professional opportunities. Like you look at Wetzel from San Diego State, he'll get a contract in Turkey and so there's not a lot of guys that are quality seniors that, are going to not have professional options in traditional years. Now with COVID and the lack of players getting signed now is really kind of what the concern is going forward. And there actually might be some quality guys interested in sticking around. I was thinking, if you look at last year, just the list of seniors, majority of the quality guys that are all conference caliber or even a role player on a good tournament team, they're going to have those opportunities. But will they this year? I don't know. And if they don't have a spot, because, if you're at a premier tournament caliber program, they've got loads of freshmen coming in. You got programs like Arkansas. I mean, you look how Eric Musselman manages those scholarships. It's a revolving door. And so those types of programs are going to be loaded with depth, but there's not always going to be a spot for a senior next year. I think it's going to help potentially like the Missouri Valley type of teams and the SoCon type of teams, where those guys might get a phone call from Furman and say, hey, we got a perfect spot for you. Come play with us next year, if they're not getting an offer from Turkey or from anywhere overseas. So that will be really interesting to see play out. It's just going to really come down to how many of those offers get extended from professional opportunities.
Yeah.
And especially if these guys are hearing, hey, you might be able to be an NBA draft pick but we don't think you're quite there. You could be a second round pick, play a fifth season. Why not?
Yeah.
Right.
It could really increase the quality of play if you think about it, especially in the mid-major and the low majors. Having got, the thing people always talk about when they're looking for, upset picks in the NCAA tournament, it's look for the experienced team. Well, now you're going to have teams that are a lot more experienced. And so it'll be interesting. I mean, look, I'm hoping to get to Thursday, but in a couple of years, it'll be interesting to see how these teams look that have got these guys who are so experienced. I mean, even Kentucky might have guys who have 2 years. I mean, it's insane.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know
what K doesn't have him transfer to Duke first.
Yeah.
Right. The other, in all seriousness, the other thing I'm considering, and this is not me just trying to get David to go crazy by saying they should go to 48 minutes.
You do not want to do that.
They should go
do
to
not
corners.
want to.
But
no quarters.
In all seriousness, remember the game's you still only got 200 minutes to hand out to these kids. So that's the part I'm interested in. It's all fine and dandy if you can have 15 guys on scholarship, that's great. You can only play 5 of them at once. And that's going to be really interesting to watch in the next couple of years as well, because it will bring up the quality of practice because you got more guys with more experience. But in the game, you can still only put 5 of them out there. And if you've got like 6 seniors or something, it's going to be an interesting scenario at a place like, Robert Morris.
Yeah.
Then Zach, why don't we just go 6-on-6?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we need to make the court physically bigger.
Okay, that's not as bad of an idea as quarters, but that is a really bad idea.
No, you make the court physically larger so you could finally put in the FIBA line.
Still not as bad of an idea as quarters, but a really bad idea.
Well, let me ask you. You actually mentioned the quality of play Zach, is maybe going up because of that. Joby, how about the quality of play for this season with the lack of practice, the lack of exhibition games, the lack of
going to be
maybe even a non-conference schedule?
We've seen in football, the quality of play is down.
Down. There's other words you could use, but yes, down.
But you see in football, and particularly on the defensive side of the ball, has been a surprise of how far it's been down. And that is usually you say, oh, defense is ahead of the offense. Well, the defense needs to be actually out there and organize themselves. Once they're organized, they can be ahead of the tricky offense. But they haven't been able to do that. I think you're going to see a very similar thing for basketball on both ends of the court this time because of the lack of repetition against quality play. Missing those 2 scrimmages is a deal. It is a real deal. You can only learn so much practicing and playing against yourself. Yes, the quality of play will be down. It's not going to be through the floor. I think it's still going to be an enjoyable product. Hell, college football is still an enjoyable product to me. But the quality, yes, it'll be down.
Well, that kind of leads into tell you. Let's start with you. You being a selection committee guessing expert, and I'll also talk to Rocco, maybe even Joby about this. But uh, when we reach the end of the day this season, we're going to have lousy quality. We're going to have smaller schedules. We're
And
going
we're
to have
not going to have a
teams
border war.
that are going to miss a lot of games. We're going to probably have postponements and
One
cancellations.
of the games we're missing is the border war.
David, are you done?
Yes.
Okay. How do you think the committee is going to evaluate a team with this? We're going to have very unbalanced schedules. We could have teams playing different numbers of games within their own conferences. Even what's going to happen in come March? Titel.
It's going to be something where I'm going to open up the J&G and say, Joby, please tell me what to do, because I have no idea. I mean, there's no good way to measure a team that's like 20-2 against a team that's like 29-5. Like, when you have different numbers of games, it's impossible. I mean, you can do your quality wins and your tier one and your road and neutral and stuff, but I'll defer to Joby. Like, I don't think there's an easy way to do it.
No, and to take that question,
Joby, let me.
Yeah, to take that question, yeah, it's going to be tough because even within the J&G, there is a underlying assumption, of relatively similar games. But at the end of the day, we're seeing it in college football. Once again, college football is going forward. You're going to see only 8-9 games from the Big Ten and upwards of 11 from the ACC and SEC. And if the Big Ten has cancellations, they're going to be at 6, 7, 8 compared to the 10, 11 because they don't have room on the calendar. You're still going to see an undefeated Ohio State is going to be in the playoff. It doesn't matter if they're 6-0 or 11. They're going to be in the playoff. Thank you, Big 12, for imploding. The same thing's going to happen in basketball. A high-quality respect, but it's going to be more subjective. There's going to be a subjective component like we've never seen before. But if, a hypothetical, if you have a 20-2 Duke in your perspective, John, a 20-2 Duke who does miss a few ACC games and doesn't play out of conference as much, is still going to be a number one seed over a Big Ten team who might have gotten beat up, Purdue, who happens to win the conference, for instance, on a shock, and who happens to be 23-7. I think losses will matter more in that case, but also we're going to see a lot worse records. There are going to be a lot of teams around 500, I think, who get in, and the reason why is because there's going to be fewer out-of-conference games. So that 10-10 team in the ACC, that 10-10 team in the Big Ten, who then only went 3-2 out of conference, 13-12 might get you in if your 10-10 looks pretty impressive against what subjectively we view as strong conferences in the Big Ten and the ACC.
And then you get
that's a great point. Go ahead, Zach.
Sorry, Chad. Just another thing is that then you get to the situation where I think this year you will, if we don't just evaluate based on what teams have done, we're going to go even more insane. What if Georgia Tech's 13-12, but they only play Duke once because of COVID instead of twice? If you sit there and think about the games that
happens every year, Zach. I mean, no, the unbalanced schedules happen every year in the ACC.
When is Georgia Tech ever 13-12? That doesn't happen any year.
Watch out for the Yellow Jackets this year, but go ahead.
That's a very good point. I just think that we have to, like, one of my favorite things when I look at the rankings is looking at the strengths of conferences against one another, and we're going to have some real 6 degrees crap going on here. Because, like, if a Big East team plays 20 Big East games, and like they also play 3 America East teams, to be able to compare the conferences at the level they're actually compared is going to be almost impossible without really straining on some logic. Because a lot of they beat them, who beat them, who beat them, who beat them, and they happen to play, St. Joe's on a Thursday in November. It's going to be very difficult. And the more I think about it, the more, I hate to say it, I almost think they need to expand the tournament this year just because it's just so weird.
Well, they're not. Another thing that will
I
need to
don't
be
want 350 teams. I want to make that
Right.
clear.
If a bunch of conferences don't play, it'll naturally expand. The at-large pool will
Good
naturally.
point.
True.
They'll keep it at 68.
Yeah, but the other thing that you're going to have to evaluate, at least, or do you just decide not to do it, is who was available for what games and who wasn't. Normally a point of emphasis, or at least a point of evaluation for the committee, that might be all over the place this year.
Right.
And Joby, they're going to need to, I feel like, make some sort of line before we get going here, because if there's a couple of leagues, like there's the report Adam Zagoria had that the Ivy League might not play, you're going to see the power conferences even more determined to make this thing happen, because all they're going to see is, oh, that Ivy League auto bid should be an at-large bid, because that's a chance to get more credits if they can sneak the great 13 and 12 Georgia Tech team in. So we need one of the millions of issues they have is there's got to be contingencies for what the hell happens to that spot. If it's just an auto bid, which is probably the easy answer, that you're going to see the big conferences ram even more through this, because all they're going to see is a chance to get an easy extra spot. They almost need to put some sort of protection on it, but I don't know how you would do it. I mean,
yeah, and let me kind of, Rocco, let me bring you back in here. He's talking about the 13 to 12 Georgia Tech team, but isn't that the same exact team that, had they played 6 more games in normal season, and they'd been 6 bye games against, SWAC and MEAC teams or whatever, they'd be 19 and 20, 12 and very respectable. So it's the same exact team. I think we're going to be a point where we say this team clearly belongs in the field.
Yeah, Chad.
No.
I think it depends. Yeah, I mean, just like we talk about every year once we get to March and we have a body of work to compare against all these other teams, right? At the end of the season, that exercise doesn't change. You're looking at the body of work from Team A against Team B, and you're going to have power conference teams with a ton of more opportunities than mid-level and low-level team examples, right? So now it's going to be even more drastic, but and unfortunately, the thing I don't like very much is it will be a little bit more heavily net dependent than before, because there's less data to look at.
I don't know. You think so?
I think so, because I think a lot of the margin of victory and some of the other components of the net, it's already been important to the committee the first time around. We only saw it once because last year didn't happen, but from what we know, I think that will be a little bit more significant, but I guess we'll see.
And adjusted efficiency doesn't change by your opponent as much. So you can actually do adjusted efficiency in an apples and apples, even if you're not cross.
I don't think the net uses adjusted efficiency.
Yeah,
it does. The net is much more of the net is really a predictive metric, and the predictive metrics are going to be the key here, I think, as opposed to
I knew they used efficiency. I just didn't think they used an adjusted efficiency.
But I do think, like your Georgia Tech example, final thought on that. If Georgia Tech gets 16 games against Q1 and Q2, and they go 4-12, they're not getting in. The only way they would is if those 4 wins were like 2 wins over Duke, a win over Carolina, and a win over Virginia. Then they're going to be on the bubble. But 4-12 against probably most of the competition wouldn't be good enough. So all of those quadrant records are going to be important when we get close to the bubble. It'll be really interesting. And you see the way some of these schedules are shaping up for like A10 programs like Dayton and Rhode Island, who are getting really aggressive with their non-conference opportunities. They might go 1-6 and then run the table in the A10. So these are going to be some really interesting comparisons when we get to March. As long as we can get the games in, that's a huge if.
Yeah, and let me ask you about that, Zach. Let me ask you about getting the games in, because we are normally here October 20th. Every schedule is pretty much set in stone by at this point. It has been for weeks.
Yeah, we have everything except for the
nobody knows who the hell they're playing this year.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Nobody knows who the hell they're going to play this year. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, normally the only game we don't know for sure is the game that St. Mary's adds after the West Coast Conference tournament when they lose in the semifinals to San Francisco and they desperately try and make it up by beating a Division III team. But yeah, no, nobody knows who's playing, who they're playing, where they're playing, and what situation they're playing, what the testing will be, how many conference games they'll be playing. They do largely know, but they don't know where they'll be or when they'll be. But other than that, they're on top of it. So, and the good news is that it's only supposed to start in like 35 days. But Rocco mentioned the quadrant thing, and I wonder how much we're going to use that this year. Just because, like, if Texas A&M plays 20 SEC games and also plays like 3 Sun Belt teams, I mean, the quadrants are basically going to be 75% Q1, Q2, and then Q4. But in terms of the scheduling, it's a bit of a mess, and it's it's all rumors right now. It's insane. It's like the worst. It's what everyone thinks soccer is like based on Twitter in terms of rumors is real life. Nobody knows anything. Nobody can trust anything. Finally, we're starting to get these conferences announcing what their schedule structure is. That's the good news. The bad news is they're not the same. And largely what you're going to see is it seems the consensus is a lot of conferences are going to do basically I don't know the SEC one, but an example is Texas A&M is going to go to Mississippi State, and they're going to play them twice there that weekend. Then the next weekend, Vanderbilt will come to Texas A&M and play there twice. It's very similar to like an NBA style schedule in that they're going to try and really focus on the weekends, I think, more than the weekdays, because creating a bubble is impossible. But if you're playing every day all over the place, you got no shot. Dave, you know more about this.
I know that I think the ACC and the SEC were both looking at a format to where, call it a bubble, but essentially that for a week or two they would be at 1 or 2 or 3, however many locations, and essentially at that location you would play the teams geographically furthest away from you. So, like, Miami, for instance, would play Boston College. I don't know if they're going with this format because, like you said, this is rumored. It's being thrown out there. You don't know if they're going to stick to it or not. But the ideal was to get early on any neutral site the games that out of the way that make travel difficult. I know some of the major conferences, especially with large geographic footprints, were looking at doing that. But to your point, Zach, I mean, nobody really knows anything yet.
Right, and this whole thing feels like the Uber is out front and the meter is running. Like, when they start playing, we're gonna. Tests are fine, sure, everybody get through, but there's obviously a lot of complications. Well, you don't have a 53-man roster; it's indoors. And what are the testing regimens? We don't know. Forget about not knowing who we're playing. We don't know where anyone's playing, if anybody's gonna be allowed to watch them play in person, or who they're playing against. But we do know most of them are doing double round robin. We've gotten that far.
Let me go here though, Titel. Let me ask you this though. You get to this, if it could be that Georgia Tech plays Duke twice, but both games are at Duke, or both games are home games against Duke. I mean, how do we get to that question of how we evaluate teams at the end of the year? We're going to have these very weird things here, and is it really going to be a road game at Duke if you go in and win at Duke, if there's not a single fan in the stands and you're playing in an empty arena at Cameron?
The ghosts of Hurley and Laettner floating in the background. Of course it is going to count. I've seen some conferences, they announce like the schedules that the team A is going to go play 2 straight road games at Team B's courts. And obviously if there's not fans in the stands and no crazies, that is different. I'll give you that. But it's just going to be weird. Like, I don't know if these guys have ever played like back-to-back road games before in college, because nobody ever does that. It's going to be a period of adjustment, especially for the freshmen. And it's a shame for teams like Duke, who are used to winning games specifically because of the crazies and the fans and the noise. Like, I think they're going to have a hiccup or stub a toe here and there in a close game because, like, the opponent's not going to miss a clutch free throw because there's nobody going crazy in the background.
Make it the referee will not be calling a non-travel on Grayson Allen for 5 steps.
But Joby, this is one of the reasons why home court advantage is so big in college basketball is that it really is such a tough play for those fans.
Will it be equal? Because Dan Mullen, who right before he got
I've never believed that. I've never put much stock in the road wins.
Hold on, I got something for David.
Dan Mullen, right before he got COVID, ironically, and forced his team to cancel their game. was mad that he basically walked into a true road game because of how loud Texas A&M was, and Florida got upset. Will we have different rules based on different locations? A place like North Carolina and Virginia will likely have no fans, but those Florida schools, Florida State, might have fans in the stands. Who knows? And so is it,
it's important.
Will we be evaluating road wins the same way? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to have to change up the whole damn J&G, which definitely takes road wins into account, but I might have to.
The one thing I would say, though, is this can go both ways. Like an example of a bad team, let's say Georgia Tech. Their chances to beat Duke at home are not very high.
Zach, are you ever going to use another team as an example tonight, or is every point you make going to be?
I should have said Boston College, and Zach would be lathering.
Yeah.
So I'll give you.
I'd agree with Boston College.
Northwestern.
Wake Forest.
Okay,
yeah.
You don't just go into the Welsh Rhine Arena, but no, Northwestern gets the wins they get are because they get a crazy crowd and they get a chance. They upset Michigan State. Well, Michigan State's going to go in there now, and it's going to be empty. There's every chance that Michigan State just wins that game by 45 points that could have been lost. This goes – it's actually going to be – I fear kind of that it's going to be more stratified this year for a bunch of reasons, including if you think about the issues we've seen in sports that have come back in terms of the inability to have conditioning. You got a lot of soft tissue industries. A lot of soft tissue injuries.
Injuries, yeah.
Yes, very different. But what you see is that if you look at, and you guys all know, the training staffs at places like Duke and North Carolina versus at a place like Wright State are completely different. And so the ability to keep your players healthy, not just from COVID, but from basketball has a million terrible injuries that can happen. And now those are even more likely with the way this thing is shaken out, because guys haven't been able to do their off-season training in most cases. In some cases, they have. So it's going to be huge advantages for the money programs that are able to get the PPR tests and have a staff of nutritionists versus, I got to scroll down to find somebody more pathetic. UC Riverside. It's going to be a little different for them. And I think that it's just going to, in a lot of ways, it might show the gulf might grow between even within conferences.
And Zach, one component of this, when we talk schedule with it, what I'm noticing with schedule, just from an insular Virginia point of view, but I think it's common among very other high-level Power 5 teams, is they want to play each other out of conference because they trust the protocols in place. Virginia is fine playing Villanova. They're fine playing Florida. The main game gets you nervous because are those main kids going to be under the same protocols, as the Gators and the Wildcats are certainly going to undertake?
It's a concern. And a thing I've been thinking of this week, I randomly started to think of it, was we all know that normally this time of year is when especially the SWAC and the MEAC schools fund their entire athletic departments by doing the 12-game road trip at Kansas, North Carolina. That ain't there this year. And those are programs that are on a knife's edge as it is. I'm really worried.
Yeah. Without the NCAA tournament money from last year.
Right. No NCAA tournament money last year. What's Alcorn State going to do? I mean, it'll be good in a way for their student athletes, because if they're just going to play a round-robin SWAC schedule, they'll actually play a home game before January against a Division I team. But it's going to be really – it's bad enough for all these athletic departments in terms of financially anyway with COVID, but there are some who are going to just lose the whole way that they try and balance the budget. Yeah. And the thing you mentioned, though, the term is why this thing is going ahead. I mean, the NCAA can't lose that tournament 2 years in a row. It won't happen. That's why I think we're going to have a million disruptions, but it's almost – I shouldn't do this given what 2020 has shown us. I still, for some stupid reason, can't envision them not having a tournament this year.
Game 1 of the World Series is tonight. We thought Major League Baseball was dead at its points this season.
And I got to say, Zach, first of all, the good news is that will be 2021. So forget 2020, thankfully. But second, that kind of does lead into the point here. When we do, assuming we do get through a season, which I do agree, I think we will, and we assume we get a champion at the end of the day. Rocco, let me start with you. I want to kind of throw out a couple of you with this question. Are we just going to have a big old asterisk after that champion's name after some, season where we have everybody playing a different number of games and teams that may not qualify for the NCAA tournament because they didn't even play enough games or the like?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. I think once we get to the tournament, the NCAA will do everything and have all the advantages to make sure all those games get played or have some sort of structure if they have to be delayed a day or two to make sure they get done and we move on round to round and get a true national champion. So I think from that standpoint, we'll down the road remember the champion and the Final Four for what they are. But I do think, for those of us gurus that remember all these random details and facts, it's going to feel much different. We're all going to remember how we did this mock selection, for example. We're going to remember those handful of teams that maybe didn't even get to 13 games to qualify for the tournament, or teams that maybe folded up shop and didn't even finish their season. All those things are scenarios that are very plausible. And I don't think a lot of fans, especially, are considering going into this. So basketball, of course, being a indoor sport with no helmets, face-to-face contact, it's the riskiest thing we've seen because they're not going to be truly bubbled like the NBA was or the TBT was. So you might be able to get there with the NCAAs, and hopefully some of these larger preseason events will come together because they are providing the closest thing to a bubble. But it seems to me like the majority of the schools are preferring to go on their own path and doing on-campus MTEs, and you can see they're starting to, some of them fall apart. So we're in for a huge roller coaster, and we're still in preseason mode. So
Right.
David, you agree with you? What are your thoughts? I mean, is it just going to be hey, we got through a season, we got games to watch, it was fun, but this wasn't a true champion?
I kind of agree with Rocco. I don't want to say that whoever ends up making the Final Four or making the NCAA tournament or winning the NCAA tournament will not be looked on as a legitimate champion. But are they a legitimate champion? Yes, they deserve to be for whoever ends up winning it. Is this a legitimate season as a whole? I kind of agree with Rocco that it won't be. One of the things that we're being robbed of, or we all are, but I love November. Most people, well, everybody watching this show realizes this, but maybe most people don't. There's more games in November typically than there are in March. All these exempt tournaments right out of the gate gets you a lot of interesting matchups between good teams that normally don't play each other, playing each other under very unique and fun and special circumstances. You can watch for 14 hours morning to night, and there's always a good game on. We're not going to get that this year. A lot of the better out-of-conference games are the ones that are being canceled, because if you're in the middle of a home-and-home agreement, well, what Joby said was right about as far as protocol goes, but say like Louisville and Cincinnati, for instance. Well, Cincinnati didn't want to host Louisville this year in front of no fans, so they delayed it. A lot of games are being delayed or pushed back or canceled altogether, and I think what we're going to get is a lot of out-of-conference garbage, more than what we're used to. That might be the totality of the out-of-conference season. It won't feel the same. I'm wondering if it will feel like basketball. Like, what will the quality of play be? What will the fans' experience be? Like, will people want to go to games? Do any of you all want to go to a game? Would you feel comfortable doing that now? Will this feel like basketball? I don't think it will. Not the way that – now, it'll still be fun. I'm not advocating that we don't play, but this is not going to be what we're used to.
I'll tell you what.
I don't know if I furthered your point or not, but yeah.
No, that's very well said. I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the NBA Finals, right? Like,
yeah,
it was weird. Like, you got the NBA Finals, and it's supposed to be exciting with all the hoopla, and it was still really well played, I guess, for the teams in it. And I'm not a big NBA guy, but you could just tell, like, it's much different watching two teams in an environment without, real fans there and an atmosphere that you're used to. The NCAA tournament, you have to figure, won't maybe they'll have some fans, but it definitely won't be the same electric atmosphere. The conference tournaments will be a lot different. So there's a lot of things that we're going to have to adjust to, but I think at the end we'll be fortunate to at least get a season in the tournament. We just have to appreciate
the NBA ratings were down 48% for the final.
Yeah.
380. And it's not like you can say, oh, there wasn't a marquee matchup. LeBron was in the finals. So I think the lack of fans and there were many factors, but I think the lack of fans was a part of it. It wasn't as exciting to watch a basketball game. The one sport that maintained its ratings, the fans you really don't hear because the cars are so damn loud. And so now, every other sport has seen a dip, including the NFL has seen a 11% dip this year.
Yeah, and this thing's so wide open. The two leagues that have grown their ratings are the WNBA and golf. I mean, those two don't exactly have a lot in common. So,
Zach, are we really talking about golf?
No.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to jump in here and say when we get to WNBA, okay, but when we get to golf, no.
No. I'm just.
It's time to call into this podcast. I'm going to run through each of you for any of their final thoughts. Tytel, let me start with you.
So, assuming the season does happen, I think it's time to start picking a sleeper. I'm going to go with North Carolina Asheville. Here's why. They were terrible last year at a couple of things, defense and free throw shooting, which are kind of important. They still earned a 5 seed in the Big South tournament. They won their first-round game and then lost to Gardner-Webb. They have 0 seniors and 1 grad student on the current roster, so it sounds like they're young, but they started 5 sophomores last year. They bring them all back. And not just bad sophomores. They have a shooting guard in LeVar Batts Jr. He transferred from NC State. They have a center in Cody Jude. He led the team with 67 threes last year. Their coach, Mike Morrell, he was an assistant to Shaka at both VCU and Texas, and this is year number 3 for him. So this is his original recruiting class of juniors. Plus, when you look at the rest of the conference, Radford, their whole starting lineup's gone. Winthrop lost 3 starters. Sleeper pick Asheville. Write that one down.
All right.
Write that down, definitely. We're going to be moving into, when we come back next month, into our preseason podcasts, in which I will be able to tell everybody what I've been typing here while we're going on in our little chat about how good Georgia Tech is going to be this year, despite what Zach says. On that note,
I
Zach,
actually do think they're going to be good this year.
But Zach, your final thoughts.
Mine is kind of we talk about with COVID and everything and people who are at risk, and this is not nearly as interesting as John's incredibly insightful Asheville points, because he's far more insightful than I could ever be. But I'm interested to see the standard of refereeing this year, because what we've seen as the sport has grown in the last few years, and pay is so low for these officials anyway, and they're an older group of folks anyway, so I'm worried about them for COVID being susceptible. Well, it sounds like we're getting more of an old school look this year of very regional schedules and exempt tournaments at one site. If these officials aren't going to have to be doing 6 games a week, going all over, half the country, it's going to be better for their health. And I wonder if they're going to be able to call better games because they're not going to be as tired. Or if at the same time, another thing that we saw back in the day was drastically different styles of refereeing based on the leagues. I wonder if we get that a little more this year, kind of an old school 70s feel. That's not remotely interesting to anyone, but it's a thing I've been thinking about.
Well, I'm glad you're thinking about it at least. Joby.
Well, when we talk about asterisks, and Zach, you'll appreciate this. Chad, you can close your ears. The person I thought said it best, and this is how I will view a champion, is Jurgen Klopp, whose team won a championship after 30 years in the wilderness. And he said,
"It's tainted."
Yeah, he said, "Give Liverpool's title an asterisk because it's the most difficult year to become a champion." So with that sort of attitude, that's how I think I'll view it. It will be different. But in conclusion, I'll love to see an asterisk because that means it'll be 3 straight years with Virginia as the real champion.
Wow.
Defending champion back-to-back. I don't know how many head coaches can be defending champion 2 straight back-to-back years, yet only win 1 national championship. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? But
On the hot
Rocco,
seat.
let me throw it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. So I don't want to beat it with a dead horse because I know I kind of alluded to it earlier, but some of these larger events that have proposed opportunities to host a large number of teams, such as Vegas, Houston, Indianapolis. We know about the ESPN more driven ones in Orlando and Connecticut, but But those first three I mentioned, they're still not making any announcements on the teams that are going to come. And they're actually starting to become more of a plan B for a lot of schools. Schools now starting to opt a lot more towards these on-campus multi-team events. And what you're starting to see, and what I'm starting to see, is some of these things fold because they're not partnered with a hospital or a set of doctors that are driving protocols, or they can't get, if you only have 4 teams coming to your school, but their conferences don't agree on what the protocols are, wait too long to announce it. They're going to have to move that event, and all of a sudden these teams need 3 games. And so it's going to be really interesting to see if places like Houston, Vegas, and Indy, we'll just use those 3 as examples, sit back and wait for all the rubble to kind of fall apart and take in as many of these teams as they can as a fallback option. I know Vegas has opened themselves up all the way through February for leagues like the Big West and the Big Sky and the WAC. It'll be really, really fascinating to watch to see if they're going to need to take advantage of that, or if at some point they just pull the plug and start planning with those organizers. I think the reason why they're not right now is it's expensive to commit to that right this second. But at the same time, if they want to get games in and they want to have a season, it might be their only and safest option to do so. So definitely keep your eye on that. And it makes, some of the scheduling that has been announced very interesting. You look at Gonzaga, they just set up games in Orlando, Indianapolis, and Sioux Falls. And they're going to have to go to all these locations in less than 2 weeks and assume that everything's going to go down safely. If anything happens, these are big television network broadcast games. I think they just said the game in Sioux Falls is going to be on CBS. I know that Jimmy V will be on ESPN. And so, they've got a lot on the line. That's just one example. And so I think what a lot of the coaches, from what I'm hearing, they're all focused on testing, and they're just like testing. Like, let's get this all set up. But what they're not thinking about enough is like how to prevent anybody from even getting positive, and like, what are the precautions, and which doctors should we partner with? We're definitely seeing from at least the organizers I've talked to, that's been their biggest concern. So obviously hoping all these games go off without a hitch, but just know, like, percentage wise, we're going to see a lot of these scenarios play out, and we should prepare ourselves.
Yeah, I gotta say, we're probably going to see a lot of games getting scheduled mid-season as well. We could be suddenly finding out a team lost its game in a weekend in January. There's a team from another conference. Hey, let's play a non-conference game against each other because we're not playing. There's going to be no predictability to who teams are even playing.
Kind of like baseball and softball.
The end of the season.
Yeah, just like in football, we're like, I think in football, you saw University of Houston had like 3 new opponents every week. You're going to see some of that.
And some of those were rescheduled, like brand new games, like the Baylor-Houston game, which ironically got canceled, was hey, you're available, I'm available, let's go. And then it fell apart. But that's sort of the actual action did occur, and I think is more easily done in basketball than football because of fewer moving parts on scholarship.
Absolutely.
David, before I go to you for your final thought here, I just wanted one piece of news we didn't hit on already is there is talk about this selection committee expanding out from 10 members to 12 members.
Yes.
For this year or for next year. And we have breaking news that we haven't had good authority who those 2 extra members are going to be, correct?
Well, yeah, me and you. One of those is an excellent selection. Yes. I don't know why they invited you.
Absolutely. We have confirmed it that the reason the committee is going out to 12 is because David and I will be on the committee starting this year, and we are going to be perpetual members, I believe, correct?
Hey, we tweeted at David Warlock. He didn't deny it. That it was going to be
me. Let me ask you for your final thought.
That's more confirmation than some of these schedules.
Yeah, all right. I real quick here. I know we're up against it on time, but like Titel gave a sleeper, I'll give a sleeper. I want to bring Georgia Tech back into the conversation. They are my sleeper, as they do every year. I think they will be asleep all season long.
Wow, we already have a team of the people without a schedule. This is kind of amazing.
Oh yeah, we haven't done that. Are we going to do that? I don't know. I don't know. We will do it again someday.
At this point, though, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. We will be back in a couple of weeks to start our preseason podcasts and looking at preseason previews, looking at how good Georgia Tech is going to be, how.
I'm going to do an hour on Georgia Tech.
We might do it. We do that because they're going to be a good team this year. They are going to be in the NCAA tournament if they stay healthy and everyone else does that. But on that note, though, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. On behalf of Rocco Miller and Joby Fortune up here, with John Teitel and Zach down in the bottom row, and David Griggs down there in the middle as well. I don't know how we keep inviting him, but I'm Chad Sherwood. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back again with a preseason.
We'll be into our
previews in a few
preseason
weeks.
stuff. Yeah.
Yep.